our guest Wael is a graphic designer and a type designer, originally from Beirut, currently based in New York. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Graphic Design from NDU in Lebanon, and then later on received his MFA from RISD in Providence in 2013. He's the co-founder of the award-winning design agency in New York, Morcos Key. He's also the co-founder of One-on-One Projects. Wael has been featured in print magazines 50 Under 30 and was named a Young Gun by the Art Directors Club and an Ascender by the Type Directors Club. We are super, super happy to have him on. And so welcome, Wael.
Thank you.
Wael, so I'm very curious about, I think a good place to start is, there are lots of types of designers. I'm very curious what drew you into specifically type design, that little niche of this broader universe of designers. What about it attracted you?
First of all, marhaba for everybody who's joining us. This is super cool. It's really intimate, but it's not because we have 51 people here. It's like a mini lecture. The short answer to that is maybe because I was never a great illustrator, and I found a lot of freedom in the restriction of drawing letters. At the end of the day, drawing letters in any language is a set of conventions that you have to follow and build on. If you draw an A that doesn't look like an A, people are going to have difficulty reading it and using it. I think working and drawing within these restrictions was kind of freeing for me because my illustration skills were never excellent and I would never be an illustrator. That was something that made me really comfortable and felt really happy, and it was really rewarding drawing letters. The other thing is that Arabic typography was and is still a little bit underdeveloped compared to other scripts. So as a designer, every time you do something, you feel that you're adding something or you're making a new contribution or you're breaking a new ground, and that is always, exhilarating and exciting to there's still so many firsts to be designed for Arabic typography, and I feel it's much needed. It's surprising because I remember clearly in my undergrad. I was born in Lebanon. I was raised in Lebanon. We speak a lot of languages, and I went to NDU, which is an English university following the American system. So all the classes were in English. Arabic was not cool, as a design element to work with. And I remember that we were waiting to go to class because we wanted to do things in Arabic. We wanted to do like graphics that look like everything out there, like the international style, like what these famous designers from Europe and the States are doing. And anything in Arabic was, no, that is not cool. Because we couldn't see, amazing graphic design and typography in Arabic. I think that slowly and changed to the exact opposite, and I think it's the most exciting thing to work on is the Arabic language formally.
Yeah, I'm curious because the Arabic language, like most languages, has has a long history, like a heritage of calligraphy and a heritage of the typeface mattering. Right, people cared about what it looks like. What you're doing, and I think the state of typography now is focused on a sort of a digital framework, right? And so, do you feel like you're connected to that legacy? Do you feel like you're connected to this broader legacy of handwritten typography?
Absolutely. I mean, typography is a set of convention. So we have to build on what was done before, and specifically calligraphy, especially in Arabic. There's a rich history of calligraphers trying to work with the script and to render it on paper. And then the whole mechanization of the script, and from printers to typewriters to now digital computers and now phones. So language is still trying to move through these technologies, but the essence of the rules and the proportions that the brain is used to it's still in Arabic calligraphy. So absolutely, I am not a calligrapher.
Yeah.
A calligrapher is a whole different artistic endeavor. It's a lot of muscle memory. Every time a calligrapher puts the brushes on the paper, like the form, the proportion is almost perfect. Whereas as type designer, we have the privilege of just tinkering with that curve until we like it. But that relationship of these two curves is still there. The proportion are there. It's just how you interpret them to create different systems of shapes and relationships that become a specific font, and then you interpret them differently, and they become a different font. So, but the essence is there, and the history of calligraphy is also not linear. Different regions have had their different interpretations and contributions. All the way from the eastern sides of Iran till Morocco, to the northern parts of Levant, to the Gulf and the south. Every culture has its own calligraphic histories and references, and that what makes it rich and exciting to draw from these past and then reinterpret them in modern ways. So actually, I recommend all type designers working in Arabic to reference calligraphy very closely before they start experimenting with new shapes.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be talking about sort of aesthetics and art and design throughout the course of this conversation. I want to just take a slight detour to talk about business a little bit, and to talk about opening sort of typography and the work you're doing as a mechanism to democratize and to sort of flatten things up. When you work on commercial typefaces, right, and you reimagine these brands, or you create open typefaces for people to use all over the world. Do you see it as a way of like, I'm actually connecting people? This is part of what I'm doing. Is that, or do you see like,
weirdly enough, yes. I mean, a lot of times I feel like I'm building secret connections with people that I don't know. I mean, first of all, I run a graphic design studio, but we consider typography as one of the most essential tools in our toolbox, and it's one of the most powerful a graphic designer can use. And sometimes I say, a picture says 1,000 words, but who is to define what these words are? Everybody can interpret them differently. Language, as the shape of the word, is much more specific in meaning, even though it can be very metaphorical as well. And the cool thing about designing font is that you're not designing a finished poster or a finished business card or a logo and that's it. You're actually creating a tool. A font is a piece of software that people can install on their machines and type whatever they want with it. And it's always surprising to see that font used in different ways. So yes, sometimes when I'm drawing font, I'm imagining the designer, the other graphic designer, the other end of that interaction, receiving that software and and using it. And the fact that I'm also a graphic designer, that I use typography in my projects for my clients. Also, I'm trying to think what would I need for a specific branding project or a signage project, or typesetting books. What would be most useful?
Yeah, you're the end user.
Exactly. And I mean, the best projects are the ones that you are paid to do, but then the institution behind them wants to release them as open type sources for free. Because this is when the font can have the most reach, specifically in the Middle East. Awareness around licensing, and the work that is needed to finish a typeface project. Not everybody is aware of that. So the opportunity to disseminate these little softwares and have people have access to them and use them to communicate back. Yeah, that's definitely an exciting thing.
Do you have a sense of, is it a small community, like the community of people who focus specifically on Arabic typography at a commercial level? Is it a really small global community? You guys are all sort of learning, pushing each other, or how does it work?
It is a very, very small community, and I would say, I don't know, 20, 30, but it's slowly growing and changing and opening up.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people know each other. A lot of people collaborate with each other. We're definitely inspired by the work that other people do. I mean, that's how I came. I kind of learned what I know through collaborating with friends. I did not do my master's in type design specifically, but I have close friends, mostly Pascal Zohri, Christian Serkis, and Khajak Apelian. The three of them have done masters in type design, and I think they're close collaborators, and I've worked with them on several projects, and this is how I built my knowledge. Surprisingly, I mean, it's a very, to me at least, it's been like a very kind of master and pupil and kind of like one-to-one skill kind of teaching and learning and giving feedback to each other and showing process and to each other. So yeah, it is I mean, it's funny that a lot of the people from that community are actually Lebanese for some reason. I don't know why. Yeah, but Lebanon does have a history of printing presses that is also interesting to look at.
It's interesting to think about. You're mentioning in the beginning, you were mentioning like there are these like big challenges, you know? Like I'm curious, what are the white whales? What are the Mount Everests that typographers, type designers sort of think about? Like, oh, like if I take a look at this, these are all original work by you, I believe.
Yes.
From a technological perspective or from a technical perspective, what's the process? What's challenging here? You know, like what's challenging about developing this? If you were to explain it to like a 15-year-old who says, okay, what's challenging about developing a typeface for commercial use that works on web and print?
15-year-old. I think it's the complexity of this whole system of little shapes that need to work together.
Yeah.
One of my favorite typography related quote is by a very famous type designer called Matthew Carter, and he says, that's me. Let's see if I'm gonna ruin that quote. Typography is not a set of beautiful letter; it's a beautiful set of letters. So what matters is not each letter being individually pretty and amazing, but how it connects together and the whole set being harmonious. And that is all what typography is about. I think the challenging part is understanding if you make a decision in one letter, how will it affect the other letters. If you make the tail of the waw specifically, how will it affect the tail of the ra. If you make the bold of the sin, sod, lam, how will it affect the bold of the calf. So there's a lot of little relationships that you need to be aware of, and it's like a master puppeteer with 500 strings that you're pulling at the same time until you get the fine-tuning of this visual symphony, if you will. So I think that is the essence, that is the core of what designing a typeface is about, and that is hard to master because it takes a lot of skills, and it's also a little bit of training your eye to start looking for things that you start interpreting. Is teaching yourself how to unread, you know, because when you see a word you read it automatically and that's it. You have to reteach your brain to look at these words in terms of negative, positive, in terms of rhythm of the words, in terms of the composition of the word itself. So it can be challenging, and I'm not even talking about the technological complications, i.e. the softwares that allow Arabic to seamlessly being integrated into your design process.
Yeah.
And that is a whole chapter on its own.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Like at work, for example, for me, we do a lot of bilingual stuff, and it drives me crazy that if I use one font for English, like if I use a sans serif font in English, the Arabic looks totally different, and it's like different sizes and different.
Yeah.
The font size, it drives me crazy. Listening to some of the work that you do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I can talk for hours, but I'll let you drive.
Yeah, I'm curious. When you started talking about you're also an end user for this stuff, what do you think of do you exclusively use your fonts at this point?
No, I don't. I don't have I haven't designed enough a library big enough to cover all the needs that I want. I have, I think, about 6 commercially released full typefaces that cover a lot of my needs, and obviously I know them with my eyes closed, so I know exactly what they're going to look like. Sometimes I start with them, and then if I want something more specific, I try to find something else. There's a lot of flavors in typography, and my body of work has not covered all of that. So no, there's a lot of fonts out there that I also use that I haven't designed.
Are there and excuse the ignorance, but what are the major types of shortcomings that if you were to describe specific fonts versus others, right? Like if you were to describe like a Range Rover versus like a Mini Cooper, right? They're both great cars, but they just do very different types of things. What are the standard types of shortcomings that fonts could have?
You would think that a font is just letters, and then once you can read it, it should work everywhere, but we don't read everything the same way. So actually, the way a font is supposed to use will dictate a lot of design parameters that go into it. Meaning, if a font is supposed to be used at like a 6-point in a dictionary, you need to draw the shapes in a way that are still legible when they like scale down. So you open them up, you make them a little bit grotesque. It's a little bit like makeup for theater, it's a little bit exaggerated so people from the far can still see that expression or something like that. If you're designing something that needs to go on a screen, you have to be aware that the amount of pixel is not as big as the ink that can reproduce. So you have to also design it with that in mind. If you're creating something that needs to be read for a long period of time, i.e. pages and pages in a book, you want to design something that enhances the shaping of the words so they're organic, so the eye can see like the shape, because that's how our brain reads. If you want something that looks good for headline, meaning can be used at a bigger size and needs to look cool, you can invest in weirder shapes and tighter spacing, so things are more like blocky, and it gives you like this nice typesetting. So there's a lot. There's also how many weights it exists on. If you want to choose a typeface that have enough weights for the type of hierarchy that you're creating in the design. Language support, if you want to use any Urdu, Farsi, or other language that use the script.
Speaking of Urdu and Farsi, are you constantly looking at other scripts, other languages as inspiration, like looking at Urdu, or looking at Japanese, looking at Korean, looking at
So I don't speak Urdu nor Farsi, but the alphabet is very similar to Arabic with some changes. So it's always helpful to add those, because I've already designed several hundred glyphs. Designing an extra 20 will make it support 3 more languages. So I'm always happy to do that. And the answer is yes, I do look at other scripts and other fonts, whether Latin or other Asian scripts, just for inspiration. There's a lot of experiments that go there. And the mistake is to just do them exactly the same in Arabic, whereas you have to break it down and then reconstruct from the ground up to see what the Arab might look like with that thinking in mind, not necessarily with that shape pasted onto a letter in Arabic.
So you've been talking a lot about your work as a designer, and I'm curious, over the years that I've been exposed to you or aware of your work, I've noticed that you do a lot of this like abstraction, where you sort of break down the Arabic script into sort of like design elements, individual design elements. It seems almost like a texture. How do you approach that work, and what's your sort of process? What's your inspiration for these types of pieces?
Cool. The first thing I need to mention on this slide is that the top left one that has these wedge shapes is a font by Lara Aswad. That was a book, that was a design project in my thesis, and I'm using other people's as examples. But that, for example, that middle poster that says "Fawqa Qaws Quzah," yes, it does have these abstraction of shapes and becomes more like a visual pattern. Actually, calligraphy itself is a very modular at its micro level. Again, for example, the head of the qaf and the fa and the waw all have similar structure. Is that same loop? So if you're doing it at one style with one pen, they're supposed to be almost the same. So the script itself is based on these little abstracted strokes that mean nothing on their own. And I think it's a mental exercise maybe that I do sometimes, is to go back to these processes and break it back down to its essential basic strokes of verticals, horizontal loops, and when you combine them, they form the letter. I think it's a little bit of a exercise that I do.
Yeah, it seems like that middle, it seems almost like a juxtaposition to your other work, because like all your other work is about like creating sustainable systems.
Yeah.
These sustainable systems that are the opposite of abstract, right?
Exactly.
They are like overwhelmingly, they don't obstruct meaning. They communicate meaning as fast as possible. Whereas all this stuff is about abstracting. And like,
exactly, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. The project that you're showing on this slides are usually self-initiated or posters for artistic collaboration with other people. And I think maybe I'm trying to balance that with the client work that I do, because I mean, when you're designing an identity or a logo or typesetting a book, you're helping a client design and communicate clearly. Like you said, there needs to be ما في التباس on what we're trying to say here. It's not an abstracted, ambiguous piece that you lose yourself in it, which is one type of service that you can create for a client.
yeah.
If you're designing a signage, the stop or kuf sign needs to be clear what it is. If we're designing a poster that can be hung on somebody's living room so they can daydream, you have to also go in an abstracted route to allow that room for interpretation. So I think it's probably two different ways of thinking about visual communication that I jump back and forth in.
I want to talk about two main topics before we open it up. You teach this stuff a lot, and you've done these workshops where you try to communicate your sort of approach to all this stuff. Do you feel like the students you have, or the most successful students that you've taught, whether they are professionals in their own right but are taking these workshops on the side, do they have to speak the language to be able to be really successful Arabic typeface designers?
I think this is the question I get asked a lot, because I design Arabic typefaces, whether a designer of a certain script needs to know that language, whether I need to know Thai if I'm designing a Thai typeface, or do they need to know Arabic? It's hard to tell. I think the question is more of a question of agency and access. I believe that if a company is investing in a specific language, there needs to be people who understand that language and its connotations and its cultural context present on the table, on the team, having a say in the decision, having a seat on the table, being part of that conversation. And it's interesting because typography operates at two different levels. You know, the basic level of it's black and white shapes that are universal. Anybody can read black and white shapes and understand curves and things like that, and spacing. But at the other end, it's entirely cultural, entirely abstract for people to add to it their own specific memories, connotations, meanings, and cultural references. Ruqa font has totally different character than Diwani, and where you would use that. You know, Ruqa is that broad pen that you see on a lot of banners, yaftat, or let's say as'ar bi su' al-khudra, because it's quick, it's simple. Whereas Diwani, it's much more elegant, it's much more opulent, can reference history and authority and dignifying messages. And these things, and a typeface that has a hint of a Moroccan Western flavor, like let's say a Kufi Maghribi, is entirely different than the Kufi, the Fatimi or the Mamluki. So they have these nuances, and you have to be exposed to these things. You have to see them in the streets. You have to see them in other applications to kind of understand it. So you have to be able to decode these references and these meanings attached to these scripts, so you can design a typeface. And I think, therefore, speaking the language is almost essential so you can decode it. So I might be able to look at a Thai script and draw things that are beautifully drawn, but I'm totally blind as to what that means in the culture and how does it connect to other Thai scripts in the past or in contemporary visual culture. And I think it's the same thing for Arabic. So you can do it, but you're shooting a little bit in the dark if you don't have somebody on your team that's doing proper consultancy and having a say in the design that knows the language and the culture, I think.
In some ways, you're a technologist, right? In some ways, what you're doing is super tech facing, right? Do you feel like big tech is coming on board with actually using beautiful modern scripts, Arabic scripts, for websites, for software, for modern software, for apps? I mean, do you feel like there is a sea change there?
There is, and like everything in life, it's really driven by capital more than just their desire of preserving language or developing more language. I mean, fonts are software, so big companies pay licenses to type foundries when they want to use that software. So, for example, let's say Uber as an app will have to license its fonts and pay yearly fees. And when it's an app used everywhere and on so many websites like communication material, print and advertising, it racks up to a big bill. So what these big tech companies realize that if they invest a little bit of money on designing their own proprietary font, they will save a lot of money down the line from paying yearly licensing fees. So it's pushing a lot of tech companies to actually invest in that route and to want to have their own fonts. The positive repercussions of that is that it's creating rooms for explorations for designers to be paid to do what they do best and to explore ways of creating different voices. So it is influencing each other. The market is helping fonts being developed more, but it's not from a cultural preservation or advancement perspective. It's more from they also do care about communicating effectively when they open up to new markets. They want to be able to appear friendly, part of the culture, yet global at the same time. So, yeah, that's why they do it.
My last question is about a project that you run called One-on-One Projects, which brings me to a broader question about your thoughts on using art and design, not even your thoughts, the way you're drawn to use art and design for social messaging, for advocacy, for bringing people together. I see it as a very solid through line when I look at your work. Do you see it that way too, or for you think I'm not making any sense?
No, you are. I think it's like an instinct. I moved to the States about 10 years ago, and I've been living in New York and Brooklyn for about 8 now. Yeah. And I think it's also part of what New York is as a city. It's a place where a lot of people come from different places. I think we talked about New York one time with you and me. People come from all different places and they just resettle here, and they try to build communities around them of people that they can relate to. It's like building a much bigger family. I think in a way, what the One-on-One project is something like that. So it's a way to connect to people that share these cultural backgrounds as we do. It's a platform that exists mostly on Instagram, and we have a blog. And what we care about is stories of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, especially with the current political climate in the USA. There's a lot of, push against these sort of identities being expressed to their fullest. And we called it, it's a project with a group of friends, and we do it, remotely and almost on a pure volunteer basis. It's with Kamal, Lynn Amhaz, Wael Ghanem, and Chantal Jahshan. We called it One-on-One. We were trying to see if there's a way to put a bigger umbrella around all these different communities that are in the States, and try to find a connecting something between all of them. It's allowed us to, meet a lot of new people and invite a lot of people in and form some sort of at least virtual community. We've done physical events, and that was also great too. It's actually very human and warm and fulfilling to be part and feel like you're part of that.
Awesome. Okay, last quick fire question, just to promote nerdery, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. We've been asking this of most of our guests. Do you have any recommendations for books, museum, films? Because you're a designer, maybe designers that people should follow, or I won't make you answer all the questions, but if you can give us one recommendation to sort of nerd out on our own, that would be helpful.
Here's a confession I have. I don't read a lot of books back to cover. I have a big library of books. I keep buying books. I don't have space for them. I usually flip through them and go back to specific chapters when I remember I know that book. I read a lot online, more like articles. The last book I fully read was actually a totally non-designed book. It's about cats. It's
because you have a cat. You have a new cat.
I recently got a cat. His name is Cooper. He's like 7 months old. But yeah, I finished the book in 3 days. I was surprised. I haven't finished a book that quickly in a long time.
Are there any designers that we should look into?
I've always been a fan of Reza Abedini. He's an Iranian designer. He has managed, and that's hard to do as a designer, to carve a voice for himself. He's an educator and artist as well. I think his work is really inspiring.
So I'm going to open it up to everybody. Let's start with Hilal. I think you had the first question. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, you can't unmute. Okay, I will ask your question. What is your go-to type font / what is your favorite font that you created?
I'm not going to use the cheesy metaphor that they're like my kids and I can't choose, but it's hard to choose. I think graphic is really interesting for me because it's one of the sans serif equivalent. And the big question was, what does sans serif in Arabic look like? What does that mean? Kufam that you see here on the right was one of my firsts. And still a big favorite for people because there's not a lot of Kufi-inspired fonts. I'm very excited about Lyon that's being mastered and going to be released in a month because it has a special italic that's completely redrawn instead of just slanting the design. So
for graphic, For graphic, are you hoping that the sort of font washes away, kind of like a Helvetica, where you don't really see it; it just kind of washes away, or do you want the reader to notice it?
In a way, it's very neutral, but it's also very soft. I mean, Christian Schwartz, the designer of Latin, calls it vanilla, like a vanilla Helvetica, because it's much more rounder, softer, pudgier shapes. We tried to bring that a little bit to the Arabic. It still has a more display quality because it does work in small sizes and longer text, but we're not used to read that low contrast, sans serif, geometric type of fonts on long periods of time. So I don't know if it operates entirely like Helvetica, but it has some of these qualities that it can be a little bit neutral, but more warm and vanilla than a default font.
Great. I'm going to ask Jose's question for him as well. I was hoping you'd hear other people's voices, but let me see. Jose's question. Where can we learn about Arabic typography? Online, books, digital? Are there any recommendations for places to learn this stuff?
That's another problem with Arabic. There's not a lot of resources out there, but it's still but there is a library being built. There's Titus Nemeth. I can write it down. Is an author who does a lot of work around the history of typography. Khat Foundation has a library called Khat Books. It's actually a publishing house that publishes a lot of books around Arabic typography. I would start with those two, and I mean, Amazon is Arabic typography. There are a couple of books out there, not a lot. There are things.
Okay, great.
That you can find.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. This is Afia. So my question is very specific. I was looking because I watched a لقاء لوائل Morcos on another platform, and he was talking about الخط الكوفي الحديث, إنه Google bought it. So I was looking but couldn't find it. So
they haven't released it yet. I'm just running after them in emails. Yes, Kufam was bought about 2 years ago by Google because they wanted to release it for free on their Google fonts, which I'm excited about. It's still stuck in their pipeline, although the design work is done. I followed them was 2 weeks ago. I don't know if they're all over the place now with the Corona thing. I hope they release it very soon. I want people to have it.
yeah, I want.
I mean, if people, maybe you can email me. There might be. I will have to double check a beta version that I can perhaps provide until it's released.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for the meeting.
Thank you.
I think Zayoun, who's on the afikra team in Amman, shout out to Zayoun. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
Thank you for this amazing conversation. And Mikey, we miss you here in Amman.
Yeah.
Hope you're safe. So while I was thinking, as a graphic designer and someone in the field, what makes a font a good font to you? Like when you see this font, you say, wow, this is a good font.
I think the attention to details. And one area particularly that I look at is the baseline where the letter connects. And how sophisticated that is, because it's one aspect that links all the letters, and it has to be it's a lot. I think the detailing of that, as well as how well the letters are drawn and the spacing, it's a lot of things that like jump to the eye immediately. But also pleasant, unexpected surprises are things that are sometimes also interesting. Sometimes you see a lot of like interesting surprises, but then you realize that they're not fully flushed across the whole alphabet, and maybe they managed to make it work in a couple of letters and then not the rest. I think a successful one is where you can translate one idea across the whole alphabet throughout the font is the challenge usually.
Oh yeah. Okay,
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I think Megan's up next.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I am not a designer of any type.
Thank God. You don't need more of those.
Psychology and
Kidding.
sort of branding. And my question is, so I moved to Abu Dhabi fairly recently, and something I've learned is that communication here, especially verbal communication, there's a lot of sort of inferred context around the communication, whereas in English, especially in the US, everything is very literal. And I'm wondering if, depending on the type of Arabic text that you're looking at, is there a lot of cultural context that's just implied and you just have to know it? Or is it also just pretty straightforward?
In typography, it's more or less straightforward, which is why it's a little bit freeing that way. You're thinking more about the shapes and how they come together, not about the meaning of the word. But that is something about the Arabic language. It's very metaphorical and poetic and contextual. So a lot of the meaning comes from the whole sentence, even from the vocalization marks that are essential part of the word, but we don't use them because we can infer what the word is. It's like removing the vowels from a English word. You can still read it. Even looking at this word here on that page, Bloomberg, imagine it's BLMBRG. You could tell that it is. Mm-hmm. So it somehow works like that. It's really malleable for abstraction and removing vocalization marks, and a lot of the words can be poetic or have multiple meanings depending on context. But that is more in the linguistic of it. I'm not sure if that necessarily affects the design, because when we're designing a letter, we just imagine how it's going to work with all possible combination with all other letters. So yeah, it's a little bit a disconnect from the meaning, and then the meaning gets added when it becomes a word again in a sentence, and
I see.
the magic happens.
Great. I think we have one more question. Sorry, go ahead.
After that, it's an entirely different thing if you're doing a lettering piece or a logo. You know, this is where you're not designing as a font, a tool for somebody else to set meaning to it, but you're trying to capture all that meaning within the shape of the word. So then it's the exact opposite kind, almost.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Samad, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Wael.
Hi.
This is Samar from London, a fellow designer. Hope you're well. Thank you for all the interesting thoughts and talk about your work. So yeah, my question is really about Burberry. If you can talk us through a little bit of the process that went on that. I mean, you're matching an uppercase typeface with something that has a little bit more of movement in it. So I was just curious, what kind of have driven the design decisions?
I get a lot of questions about this logo specifically. Some of the commission we get are just translating existing logos into Arabic. I think there's a long practice in Arabic logos where they just resort immediately to a kufi. So this is a straight baseline, but that's because they see that there is some sort of parallelism between geometric sans and kufi. It's a straight baseline, therefore it's the best match. It can be the case, but not always. I felt part of what Burberry did when they changed their logo from the serif to this one, even though this is still geometric and all caps, it's much more neutral, but also warmer and friendlier than the one before. And we wanted to explore a route where we can translate some of that feeling into the Arabic as well. I was also, the consultant on that. We developed a couple of versions, and they all had vocalization marks because we all obviously told them that you need the dhamma on the two base, so it reads Burberry and not Berberi, and what Berberi might mean. And but fashion brands, part of being a fashion brand is having the attitude of not caring what the consumer thinks. So
love it. Why not?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think it was an unexpected solution. That's the old logo that was, I guess, working with the serif font one.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. To me, just one last sentence. To me, the Latin is a little bit of an effortless, simple geometric sans serif. So I wanted the Arabic to be an effortless, basic nasakh, and being flowy is part of all the scripts except the Kufi mostly.
Yeah. I like it. I just kind of I was curious as to why the client was brave enough to go for that. Sometimes you don't really get that.
To be also 100% honest, they only do these things because they have to in Middle Eastern markets, and it's not a big part of their communications. So they're just doing this to fill a box, and as long as they have something they think is good enough, they will just, great, we're done.
Okay. Thanks.
We're going to take one last question from Reem. Reem, if you want to unmute yourself, and then we will close up.
Hi, Wael. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I wanted to ask if there's a guide online to self-publish Arabic fonts, if you've created them yourself, and if there's any way to kind of quality check them before you publish.
I mean, the way fonts are distributed are through Type Foundries. So one way is that you can do, if you have a design, is to try to pitch it to a Type Foundry and see if they're interested in publishing it. The first thing you want to do is see if they already have any other Arabic fonts, which means they already exist in that market. They might be interested in expanding their library of Arabic fonts. There are, I can't think of their name right now, but if you email me or ask me, I can look it up. There are a couple of I don't know what to call them, consortium of like type designers that come together and launch these platforms. So to release their own fonts, so they don't necessarily release under a bigger publishing foundry. So that could be a way. I mean, the internet allows everybody to publish anything they want. You know, it's the problem is how much reach can you have on your own versus a type foundry that's been building a market and a brand recognition on the market for many years, which is why it's easier for designers to publish through a type foundry. Because they already have access to the market. If you want to do it yourself, you can publish it on Instagram. You can just set up a website and do it. You can team up with a couple of designers and create your own like collective of fonts. In terms of checking the quality, that's the other thing about Arabic typography and Arabic fonts. There is no universal standards. It's kind of freeing actually, because you can decide how many characters and language support and ligatures and things like that to include, as long as it works on the main platforms, operating systems, Adobe software, Microsoft Word, and you can generate it as a working web font. There's nobody to do a quality check except you and test it on several things. I mean, yeah. I think, for example, Google Fonts have a list of requirements for their fonts to, and it's a very long list of languages for their fonts to support, even though some rare and defunct languages that are interested in having the font supporting, that's their standard and quality thing. But there's no, I mean, you can release one with a basic set and just call it an experimental font, you know. So it's a gray area. You can think of it as a freeing in that way to do what you want.
Thank you, Wael, so much. A huge thanks to you. Before I talk about what comes next, Farah requested a picture of Cooper, which allows me to point to your Instagram. If you want to follow Wael, you can follow him on Instagram. We've been tagging him on all of our posts, so you can see that stuff too.
He was around. Hold on. Let me see if I can bring him over quick. This is Cooper.
That's Cooper.
High five. Good boy.
Oh,
high five. Good boy. Here you go.
we could have just had Cooper for an hour.
I know, right? High five. High five. Come on.
No, he sees there's no food left.
High five. Good boy. Up. Good boy.
Oh my God.
Oh, baby. Yeah.
Thanks so much to everyone for joining, and a special thanks to Wael. This was a huge pleasure, Wael. Thanks so much for making time, especially 9 a.m. 9 a.m. in New York. So
thank you for having me, and thank you for participating and being interested. And feel free to reach out to me for any additional questions after this.
Cool. I will stick in for a few minutes. If anyone wants to give feedback or ask me a question, I'll stay online for a few minutes. But otherwise, thanks everybody. Have a great day.